This week on Rockstar Superhero. A state of play exists for all of us if we'll give ourselves the chance to embrace it and enjoy its rejuvenating effects. When I met Hawaii-based author Steve Rix, I knew he had access to something I hadn't felt in a really long time. But what was it? Why was he smiling from ear to ear at virtually everything I said? Was he merely a master salesman? Was I being taken for a ride? The answer is a clear no, and this conversation, however random at times, proves that Steve believes in his concepts and a lifetime of play at all costs. Play is the groundbreaking experience, and it's right in front of us, waiting for us to take the reins. This is my conversation with a clever and lovely man, author Steve Rix, and this is a reminder that play means so much more than we give it credit for. Play saves the day on Rockstar Superhero.
I see it in you. I see it running there, silently through your veins. One man's trash is another man's poison.
I think this is going to be an incredibly fun and yet challenging experience because, as you know, and a few of our listeners might know, I am incredibly under the weather right now.
I sense that. I'll do my best to carry it for you, brother.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. So, long story short, to everybody listening, I have a severe cold. I do not have COVID, but I am really, I'm not going to exaggerate because I'm already prone to exaggeration, but I'm definitely struggling today. And my buddy Steve here, he's shown up in full regalia. Like dressed up like a hobo in a can of peaches and heavy syrup.
Wait a minute, I thought I looked like a rock star. That was the whole look.
Maybe Triumph 1983, maybe.
All right, enough of that. You got me.
Gotcha. Good to see you, my friend. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be with you, to share, from my heart, my journey, and why I'm such a goofy, playful guy, and how that really supports me finding my way to my best life, which I'm not always there, but when I'm not, being a goofball and playing gets me back on track. So excited to share with you guys today. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. You know what? I'll tell you. Joy, I don't even know what the word is, but to exude joy, sadly, is a relatively unknown quantity in adulthood, meaning like as adults we tend not to be happy. We tend to be quite angry. The world is dissonant. We feel like it's against us. So having you here just to remind us, I've been thinking about this for a while because once I knew you were going to be booked on the show, and again, for everybody who doesn't know, Steve and I are actually friends. And so he has changed my life by just sitting on the fringes of it because he brings a level of joy.
Wow, thank you. Yeah,
you're welcome. That is sorely needed in my life. So there's no question here. It's just me blabbering. But
well, I want to comment on that for a minute, Rob, because prior to this whole pandemic thing, and I don't say that lightly, right? But it was hard to get people to make eye contact with you and just smile. Yeah. Now, no one looks at anyone, right? Yeah. Like we've created these very protective containers, driven very much by the fear of physicality. But if we want joy in our lives, we have to be joy in our lives. And in order to do that, we got to kind of take those masks off of the pain and somehow find our way to a smile and a wave, a hi, some bright, shiny eyes. And forgive me, my glasses have that little lens on it, and it's bright here. So
it's fine.
Yeah, but you get it.
Yeah, I do. And in fact, I will tell you one of my complaints over the last 2 years as a person who also experienced, the COVID madness that we had in the grocery stores, as an example. You would walk by people, and I'm one of those people who says hi to everybody, right? I'm probably the single most annoying human in the world when it comes to strangers. I nod at everybody. I wave at everybody. I say hello. I say excuse me all the time. I just don't want to be in people's way. And what's interesting is the mask, figuratively and literally, has allowed people to step inward and reduce their exposure even more. And it's a really big, sad thing, especially when you realize that we can still see each other's eyes. And that is the part that exudes the soul out in the world. We recognize people through their eyes. I mean, I've had so many people walk up to me and go, Rob, and there's no way they should know me based on a mask. And yet they know it's me because of my killer blue eyes.
Well, I don't have killer blue eyes. I have killer green eyes, but cooler. But to your point, I forget who said it. It's been said many times by many people, but the eyes are the gateway to the soul, right? Yeah. And to your point of exuding joy, if the soul has inner conflict, then it's hard for the joy that's in there to find its way out. Because here's the reality. I've been in or around the people business for the better portion of my life. And if I know one thing for sure, give me 5 minutes with a human being and we'll find some joy. Now, they may not want to acquiesce to it, but when we relate our world to the world at large, everyone always has something for which they can claim joy, but there's just a lot of stuff in between us and that joy coming out. And frankly, that's been my mission the last 10 years is helping get the joy out, for sure.
Yeah. You know what, Steve? I mean, we could talk on that subject alone this entire time because it's amazing how much our energy, positive or negative, precedes us. Our families know when we step in the door what kind of day we've had. And yet, right? And yet they don't have to see us. They can feel us coming. So if we're carrying all the burden and all the weight of failed expectation, I mean, we're going to sadly negatively influence everybody around us. And for somebody like yourself or somebody like me who is in the business of people, the last thing we want to do is be a speed bump, into their potential future of good and hope, Yeah,
there's no doubt. And I don't think I've ever heard it put the way you put it, but it immediately made me think of like rolling out the red carpet when you said our energy precedes us.
Yes.
So really, we got to ask ourselves, what kind of red carpet are we rolling out? Are we bringing that high vibe, or are we the dampening energy in the room? And I am certain of this, that energy is undeniably like quantifiable, right? We can measure it. And while the tangible objective mechanisms to measure, it's not like I've got a ruler in my hand, right? Like, that's a cup full of happiness. Or
that's 1 meter of joy right there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That guy's carrying around a gallon of resentment, right? Like, I don't mean it that way, but what I am aware of is that when people are clear in owning that energy, then at some point they begin to ask themselves, what do I really want? Because like begets like, right? I mean, if I continue to hold space for negativity, it's going to find its way to me. If I hold space for that which is positive and useful, it's going to find its way to me. And to the point you and I were talking about off air, I'm not talking about metaphysical, let me have a law of attraction. I'm just talking about vibrational frequency. I'm single now, but when I was married, I could walk into my home and in an instant, I could tell the energy of my wife. Mm-hmm. And she could tell the energy of me, right? Yeah. These are not hairy-fairy things. And so energy is... we are is energy from head to toe, spirit, mind, body, physicality. So why not find our way to the best? That's the way I see it.
That is correct. And it's true. It's been proven that we are these things. So this isn't like some new age BS thing, like the path to high vibration and high frequency and success is by emanating at 78,000 kilohertz. I mean, that's a bunch of hooey, but we both know, and not just agree, but science has proven that we are spiritual beings, and we're putting all of this vibration, and those vibrations are deemed what they're deemed based on the level of vibration that's coming off of us. And that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, and to that point, there's 2 books. The one immediately comes to mind. It's by Penny Pierce. It's called Frequency. And in the book, she talks about how, you can measure the vibrational wave of the body, right? Like, so if I'm low vibration, that's why I feel low vibration, right? Like, oh, what's wrong? Or, hey, what are you all excited about, right? That there's that measurable detector within us. Some call it intuition. I just call it, emotion, right? Like energy in motion. That's all emotion is. And sometimes that motion is little to none, which looks like sadness, fear, numbness, depression. Sometimes it's raging, like frustration and anger. Sometimes it's serene, like peace and joy. And sometimes it's prolifically outward focused, like gratitude and love. And I mean, I don't want to minimize, because we can feel many, many things and ascribe adjectives to them. But in the simplest sense, what I just laid out is the column of emotion. So I just get to choose where I want to be in it, because one thing's for sure, each of them have physiological byproducts, psychological byproducts. And it really, I think sometimes there becomes this constant struggle between good and evil, right and wrong, which puts a human being in the state of guilt and shame. Now, I may be guilty of things in my life, like, yep, that I did it, right? But to carry shame with guilt is to hold myself in yesterday and not give myself the opportunity for tomorrow, which, by the way, is why you see so many incarceration stories of, transformative behavior, because for once the person is held in a space where they actually have to be with themselves. There's nowhere else to go physically. And that limitation unlocks the unlimited thought, mind, heart, soul, which, oftentimes we hear great things when people like that, get out of prison, how they change their lives and do great things for people. And I think that's probably the single greatest challenge that I've experienced my whole life, the prison of my own mind. And boy, I'll tell you what, it's created some enormously destructive experiments, because I lived in this reality that really wasn't the truth, but it became my truth. And therefore it dictated my decisions, many of them at a subconscious level.
Yeah. Yeah. We could keep referencing the things that you and I have talked about off of line, but yeah, for people who have, of course, not been privy to our conversations, I have been walking through a number of different challenges in my life, as we all do.
For sure.
And meeting you has been wild, because you bring us back to one specific reminder that as we look at our children, and we see how happy they are in their simplest form. They're just able to go outside, make stuff up, and enjoy each other's time. That even though they might, fight over a ball or somebody decides they want to be in charge of this particular game, you've provided a great resource for us through your book, Play Saves the Day, because you've said, Rob, the kids have it right. And us adults have gotten away from the things that give us happiness and hope. And right. But so like a guy like me, how does someone whose life has gotten away from them drum up the courage to start over one more time when that's all you've done for the last 15 years? How do you start?
Well, first of all, it's an amazing question. Thank you for the reference to the book, and I'll share a few thoughts from it as we go. However, you're on point. I was on a podcast the other day, and a gentleman said to me, he said, "I've read your book. It's amazing." He said, "You remind us that children," and he gave a biblical reference, but then he said it's different than that word. He talked about the innocence of children, right? And I said, yeah, and it's not even the innocence. That's probably the best word in the time they had to translate, but it is the lack of programming of a child, right? Like a child doesn't have limiting beliefs.
Right, the blank palette.
They're impressed upon that child by the culture in which the child lives, which of course could be parents, school, neighborhood, church. I mean, any number of things can impact the way an early stage child formulates their values and beliefs.
Yeah.
And excuse me, once those values and beliefs are set, the natural tendency or the neuroscience of our brain is to seek what we've already placed in it. Because at a very base level, and we talk about this in the book when we talk about the archetypes of the brain, one of them is this guy called Gary the Gatekeeper. It's your amygdala. It's the croc brain. And that part of the brain just wants to say no to everything. Like it just is predisposed to believe, nope, I've never seen that before. You're still alive, so everything must be fine. Don't need to add any new information to your life, right? And that process begins happening at 8, 9, 10 years old, because I forget, it's either Stanford or Harvard, one of these big schools, and I just forget which coast. But a number of years back, you can Google it. It was a huge study. They did a study on the word no and its impact on adolescence. And it was calculated that the average child from 0 to 18 heard the word no 30,000 times. Or was it 30? I think it's more than that. But here's the point. I'll have to go redo my math if I'm going to quote this again. I hate to sound like an expert and not have it right, so forgive me. But here's the point, guys. This number I'm certain of. It averaged 30 times a day they heard the word no. So go do the math on that. Maybe it was 30,000. 100,000 also sits in my mind. But whatever it was way too many. Right? Like the best advice I ever got with my kids, and then this will go directly to the original question you asked, which is how do I get out of that echo chamber or that loop of one more time? Right? Like we always, with our children, we always said, let's say yes to everything possible so that when no is necessary, it has meaning.
Right.
Hey,
it
Dad,
resonates.
can I sleep on the couch. Yep. Hey, Dad, can I wear my jeans to bed? Sure. Right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, the natural practical answer is no.
Of course.
However, let the child discover that sleeping in denim is not comfortable and that your bed is probably way more comfortable than our couch, no matter how comfortable it is, right?
Right.
And over time, that stuck with me. So the first thing I would say to a person to get out of that loop, and using play as a tool to do it, every human being came pre-wired to be curious and imaginative. That's how we were born. It's how we came out of our mother's womb. So having access to that curiosity and that imagination actually, from a psychological and physiological perspective, gives us a reward. And the reward is called dopamine. And for those people who are not sciencey, let me just tell you where dopamine gets its greatest press. Cocaine. Like people talk about, man, I'm on a dopamine hit. So they do a line of cocaine, right? And but the reality is what the cocaine does is it simply releases the inhibitor in your brain, so you dump more of your dopamine. You have it. You don't need the cocaine.
Right.
Curiosity actually ignites the dump of dopamine 4 times faster and greater than an outside substance use called cocaine. That's powerful. So what happens is the minute I get curious about something, anything, I activate a pleasure principle in the brain. That then wires me to my imagination. So in the very simplest sense, in his book, The Art of the Impossible, Stephen Kotler talks about find 5 or 10 subjects that your whole life you've always wondered about, but you've never taken the time to look into them, right? And man, I'm sure I have a ton of these. I have just been so obsessed down the rabbit hole of play. I've not taken time with others, but I'll give you one that really matters to me. I live in Hawaii. I love the culture of aloha. And for our listeners who don't know, aloha is more than just hi and bye. It's like to give and to receive the breath of life. Mm-hmm. That's not the literal translation, but that's the essence. Like it's a very intimate expression. When I found that out, I became very curious about all things Hawaii. I wanted to know how they got here, how they laid out the land, who were all these King Kamehamehas, because as best my knowledge is there were 4 of them, right? And why didn't they get along? And like, so that's an example of something for which when I get a little extra time, nobody has to push me down that rabbit hole. I'm excited about it. So step 1, to get out of the feedback loop, find things you're curious about, and then begin to recognize how your energy is different around that. You know, it doesn't matter what it is, right? It could be building a didgeridoo, you know, which sounds very boring to me, but for some it's very curious, right?
Right. Well, you got to circular breathe.
Yeah, that's right. The second thing that is vitally important in this process is knowing that if you're looking to activate curiosity and imagination and you can't bring it to your mental faculty, no matter how hard you try, everything else is like, it's like white noise. You can't interrupt the circuit of frustration, of anger, of depression, of anxiety, worry, sadness, whatever you're doing. That's that feedback loop. Right. That's where play comes in. So play in its very essence can be any activity. Like over here in my little office, I've got what I call a play altar. I started this podcast being goofy and playful, right?
Right.
In the book, I talk about how there's 8 different forms of play personalities. Well, one of them is a joker. Well, that's how I started. I just like I like making people laugh, even if I'm the brunt of the joke. A joker, it's a form of play. Yeah. However, what it does is it wakes up imagination, because literally 20 minutes before we were supposed to go on, I thought, well, I'm going on with Rockstar Superhero Rob. I got to show up looking like a rock star. And I called my friend who lives 2 miles from here, and I thought, I got to get there and back in 20 minutes. And I ran and I got his wig.
Oh my God.
What that does is it shows the nature of human engagement.
Right.
That's a function of imagination and curiosity. Another form of play or personality is storytelling. Sometimes we just have to imagine our life as it were different. And if we had all our children around us when they were 4, 5, 6 years old, and we said, gather around the campfire, kids, once upon a time, I'm going to tell you the story of this wizard of play. His name was Scuba Steve, and off I go on this crazy story, right? Yeah. So, and those are very, shall we call them, very elementary elements of play. But sometimes play could be going out into the wood shop, getting on a dirt bike. You know, for some it might be a paintbrush. Others it might be grabbing the wok and some food and creating something. Play shows up in many ways. So my invitation to our audience, if you've struggled with the same feedback loop, first of all, you know, and we'll talk about this more, it's a simple read. It's only 60 pages. Be sure to get the book, Play Saves the Day, because it'll embellish on all of this. But if you never got the book and all you did was say, I'm going to go play, and you even struggle with that, then your first step would be go to a park and observe children for an hour. I used to coach as part of my business practice. And one of the first things I would do with any coaching client is I'd say, between now and our next session, you have to observe children. Don't be a creeper, right? But go to the playground, go to a McDonald's bouncy ball cage, go wherever there are kids and just watch and observe emotions. And that often does it. That often says, whoa, I can still have that. And if that doesn't do it, at least it gives them some ideas of how to begin playing. Now, I know that was a long answer, but it's the fundamental, pivotal, most important part of all the work we do. You got to get into the play container. Make sense?
Yeah. So then, okay, so if you consider that a long answer, the next one should either be the exact opposite, should be really easy, or you're going to have to run on the continuation of that, because it leads me to ask the question then, how do we ignite our playground lives? How do we get going?
Well, let me give you the short answer, and then I'll elaborate with just a couple simple stories.
Okay.
What we do is we experiment with play. So if you think about our lives, when we were children, everything was an experiment. It's why we'd put anything in our mouth, right? Get that rock out of your mouth, Stevie.
Sure.
Why? It's cool, right? It's why we would chase anything. It's why, given to our own devices, sure, we'd walk in the midst of a whole bunch of moving cars, right? Because as a child, anything and everything's possible. Everything and everything's an experiment. Now, here's the nuance. The reason why I say experiment with play is because it changes the focus of our energy. If you think about as adults, like I've had 2 failed marriages. You can be sure in my next relationship, there's an old part of me that could be saying, now don't screw this up, don't screw this up, don't screw this up. However, I've done the work for the last 7 years to know that conversation is not going to get involved. When I attract that new love, I'm going to attract someone who enjoys play as much as I do, who's getting younger every day, who heck may even want more kids, like whether they're adopted or I love children. But here's what I'm really after. When we experiment with play, we stop being obsessed with the outcome and we're more about the experience. And if the feedback, aka the outcome, isn't what we're looking for, we remind ourselves, well, that didn't work. Try something else.
Yeah.
Because we've been so programmed to think, oh, I've got all this shit in my life. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can say that on your show, but I did.
You can.
Yeah. But we have all this bad stuff in our lives, and the minute we want to try to change it, we get weighed down because we think our life's a performance. So that's a much shorter answer than the last one, but it could be longer, right? Experiment. Everything's an experiment. We're just looking for the things that make us feel better, want more, think different, that kind of stuff. Does that help?
It helps a lot. I was talking with a very good friend of mine recently, and he was talking about identity and how we all identify as something. Now, I'm not talking about sexual identity here. I want to make that very clear. Not the him,
story,
her,
the narrative of who we are.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But artists, and as you know, my show is primarily focused around the creative mind and the musical, right? The musical theme, the artist, the songwriter. And to a man, their identity is wrapped up in a combination of what kind of material they're creating and what kind of feedback you're giving them to actually connect that identity. So what I guess I'm trying to say is an artist does things hoping they can get somebody to agree that what they've created is something worth listening to or participating in. And when we fail that, when we aren't creative enough or we don't come up with a catchy enough idea, it's real easy to say, I, meaning me, I am a personal failure, not just I just failed this moment, which of course is all relative anyway and subjective. Right. But no, I am a failure. We and then we seek that, it's like going on the internet and looking for the answer of something. We're always seeking the echo chamber, as you'd mentioned before. So again, not necessarily a question, but how does the play aspect weave into the identity aspect, and how do we disconnect the falsehoods of identity with who we are as adults so we can become joy-filled again?
Well, wow, that's a great question. And the answer is so simple that it's almost scary because we're not taught to think this way. As a quick aside, I don't know if I ever told you this, I actually am musical. I took 15 years of voice lessons.
Oh, I didn't know.
I was the understudy for the Phantom of the Opera. So I'm not quite a rock star, but I'm in the music field, right? So but to your point of artistry, my best art form is public communication. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, it was the best lesson I learned about artistry, and I'll hook it to the play state in a moment. I'll never forget my good friend Brian North, guy in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's just an amazing guy. He runs a real estate brokerage, but he said it was the easiest way for me to build a personal development business. I said, what? He said, I just wanted a great environment to help people live better lives. They just happen to sell real estate. My kind of guy, really cool. Mm-hmm. But he said, Steve, you and I both love speaking. I said, yeah. He said, how many times have you heard someone say, well, if just one person got something from it, it will have been worth it? I said, every time.
Yeah.
He said, well, I want you to think about changing the frame. And somebody, I forget who shared this with him, but I give Brian credit for sharing it with me. He said, if no one got anything, would you stop speaking? And I stopped for a minute. And that's when I realized my art is for me.
Yes.
I love speaking because I've practiced getting good at it. And when I do it, it feels good. And because I've worked so well at it, I know how to connect with people. So I'm never like attached to the outcome. So full circle to the question, how does play affect that? Well, if you think about it, play in its purest sense, it's never for anything. Mm-hmm. Now, when we begin to understand the power of play to transform life, that's purposeful play. However, play in its purest essence, and I define this in the book, is you're doing something for nothing's sake. Mm-hmm. Like it's just because play brings me fully present. Like I can't engage in play and be somewhere else at the same time, past or future. So A, I'm present. B, my imagination's woken up. C, I don't do it with any intention. I feel emotionally safe, and I want everybody around me in. Like, what else do I do that creates those 5 tenets? Mm-hmm. So, like when I play, I take away the attachment because I'm feeling so much high from feeling emotionally safe, feeling connected with other people, and feeling like doesn't really matter what happens. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a perfect example. I used to love to dance. Then I hated it. Now I love it again. But I loved it before I knew that I wasn't any good at it. But I grew up in the age of John Travolta doing this, right?
I'm sorry. I'll just apologize for you in advance.
Yeah, that's okay. It's all right. But watch this. Like I didn't do that right. But here's my point. I just had so much fun. And then in the 8th grade dance, they said, let's do the limbo. And I split my pants.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And all the boys laughed and all the girls giggled. And the rest of my 8th grade year, I got laughed at.
Yeah, yeah.
And I never wanted to see another dance floor. Then in my 30s, I started dating a woman who loved dance and had just taken this class on Afro-Haitian ecstatic dance. And I was like, I'd never heard the word Afro-Haitian and ecstatic and dance put together. Had no idea what I was getting into. I roll into Venice Beach, California. At sunsetting, there's this massive drum circle. And people are just going bananas. And I remember thinking, because this was kind of a new courtship, and I very much enjoyed, the love I shared with this woman, and it went on for 5 years. It was very beautiful. But in that moment, I knew that if I didn't find my way to loving dance, I was going to be on the outside looking in with a woman I really started caring about. Right. And that's when I realized dance for dance's sake, not for anyone else. Mm-hmm. And boy, that lesson has saved me countless headaches. Anytime I feel like, I'm not good enough to do that, or I might not do it right. It's like, well, where does that come from?
Yeah.
So, play for play's sake will never be attached to an outcome. And it becomes the number one tool to offset being concerned. And I wish I had it with me. It's actually on my bed. But I tell people the CEO of Play Lab is not Steve Rix. It's Bob the Minion. and the reason I say that is because anytime I would get discouraged, one of the forms of play is imaginary friend or avataring, right? Mm-hmm. So I would literally hold him and I'd say, man, I don't know if this company's going to work. And then I'd press his belly and it has pre-recorded sounds and it says, banana. And I'd be like, yeah, you're right. It is going to work, right? I mean, when you do things like that, and I promise you that some of our listeners are going to say, that's crazy until you try it. Mm-hmm. So fully coming back to experiment with play.
Yeah, man, I'm telling you. So first of all, you're preaching, which is important. because this is something that needs to resonate in the hearts and minds of everyone. I know there's so many listeners who might be saying, yeah, that's great for him.
That's no doubt.
Right. It's the whole argument of, well, that guy's got money so he can afford to play, or that guy lives in Hawaii, so it's a playground, or that guy's whatever, which is all a bunch of bullcrap because we all have.
They're all stories to give ourselves freedom to keep believing our lie.
Yes. Yes.
I've done it so many times in my own life.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, obviously there's a number of different styles of play. And you mentioned, I think you used the term purposeful play, but because there are so many forms of play, where do you recommend we start?
So some people, this recommendation is perfect. Others, they'd get a secondary recommendation. If someone says, I had a great childhood, then I say, you go remember the top 5 things you used to like to do as a child. Find those, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't necessarily have a good childhood. However, I did have at least 3 things I remembered from my childhood that I loved. One was exploring in the woods behind my dad's house and behind the summer cabin.
Yeah.
2 was playing in the sand pit that my grandfather would have dumped at the summer cabin every summer so he could do projects. By the end of the summer, I didn't have a sand pit. It was all gone, but I'd play with it. And 3 was anything where my head was stuck underwater. Like,
wow.
Which is probably part of the reason why later I became a scuba diving instructor, owned a scuba store, and have recorded over 10,000 dives. I love being underwater, right? So now if you say, okay, good childhood, bad childhood, I don't have those memories. Then I would ask you to say, write down the last 5 times you laughed the most or remember being happy.
Oh.
And in that process, we're going to find something that would be considered for you a state of play. For some, it might be with friends at a bowling league. For others, it might be a book club because you love reading and expressing. For someone else, it may be, making snow angels in the wintertime, right? I mean, it's different for everyone, but this is where you start, right?
Yeah.
Because, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, play is really different. Like I have a friend, he has a Harley Davidson. And of course, anyone who knows motorcycles know that's the quintessential bike, and it's the one that is the loudest. And, and everybody's like, vroom, vroom. Well, I call that noise pollution, right? Yeah. but not because it really is, but every time I hear it, it agitates my ears. But then I'm reminded that a lot of people just find it their way to play, because when they were a kid, going vroom, vroom was a lot of fun, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Not so much for me, but definitely for others. So, yeah, play shows up in many forms, and that would be one of the ways that I would recommend. I'll also tell you this. I'm sure at some point you'll give them, where they can find me or put it on your webpage. But if they'll follow us sometime before the end of this year, we're actually going to create what we believe is the world's first play personality and fun assessment. We started working on it last month. And, when you do things like this, you want them to be scientifically based and you want to be able to really put some cool things in place. But, give me another 10 months and I'll say, do all those things and take the assessment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're always going to want to know as much detail as possible. I mean,
for sure. It helps us narrow in on where we want to focus. You bet.
Right. Okay. So now I want to go on the opposite side for a second, because I know you knew this was coming.
Yep.
The self-destructive habit question.
Yep.
So, for people who have not been listening to my show, one of my core tenets is that question, the talk about the self-destructive habit, because we all have something that invariably keeps us away from our purpose, and we need to overcome it. And I'm curious with you, Steve, was there a moment in time where you realized you were behaving in a self-destructive way? Was it after your first or second marriage? Was it when you wrote the book? Was it a childhood memory? And then 2, how did you overcome that behavior to become the man I'm talking to today?
So first, it's always a work in progress. When you first told me we'd talk about this, I immediately said, I know where I'm going with this. And I'm so glad I had some time to think about it, because as you were asking me again, I thought, no, it goes to even something more germane, and it's so important to share it. Let me start with, what do they say? The good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's get the good and the bad out of the way and go to the ugly. Like, I've cheated on my wife. I have,
That's hardcore, dude.
The truth. Now, I have done drugs and abused them. I have emotionally eaten and not taken care of my body. I have the list of things goes on. But I'm going to tell you, that's the good. Now there may be some shock factor to that, but here's the truth. Like, listeners, don't bullshit yourselves. Like, yes. I mean, the truth is that most of us, as long as it's convenient, find a way to make the story shape why it's okay.
Sure.
That's the good. The bad, which I thought was the ugly, was my lack of self-love. But it occurred to me today, the single most destructive thing I have ever done is allowed the white lie to be considered non-destructive.
Right. That somehow there's a purity in it.
Yeah, like, it started for me when I was a little kid. Of course, I'm 55 now, so when you're a kid and all of a sudden this device rings that has this long puke green or canary yellow cord to it, if you remember that, dating myself a little, but you could pull it from the wall all the way to the couch. You could hand it to your mom, who's busy watching soap operas and smoking cigarettes after she'd worked all day. And I was excited because maybe it was grandma, but when it was anybody else, she taught me to put my hand over the receiver after I asked, who is this? Tell her who it was. And then my mom would make a decision out of convenience.
Right. Who do I want to talk to?
Yeah, and I'm not bus rolling my mom, right? She's a wonderful lady. But that's where I learned it. Like, selective, convenient truth-telling when I really didn't think it would hurt anyone else. And you know the truth of it? My wife never found out about a multiplicity of affairs. But at one point, when she became suspicious, I had an opportunity to lay it all on the line or just manage the suspicion. And we're going back 22, 23 years. And I remember that at some point I had to look at myself in the mirror and say, when do I matter enough to get to the bottom of why I'm even doing this? Right? And so as I started unpacking those behaviors and started figuring out what was going on in my world, what I realized is anywhere I could say something other than what was real and know that it wouldn't affect other people in an adverse way, but somehow affect me in a favorable way, I'd lie. And that's what it was. It was a lie, right? Now, it may have been real small, but that was what fed, remember I said good, bad, ugly, that's what fed the bad. If I kept telling myself I was good, then that offset the destructive self-loathing habits that, like, I'll give you a perfect example. When we go back and listen to this and watch it however we do it, I will find myself very entertaining. I will find myself very effective. I will find myself full of joy that I got to share with anyone who wanted to listen, and I'll say, damn, that guy's good. For the longest time, I would hate to hear my voice or to see my face when I would speak. And I remember when I finally hit the crux of what self-love looked like, I was doing a social media post about 3 years ago about play states and imagination. And afterwards, I was like, damn, that was good. And that was the first time I'd ever said anything like that. And I was like, oh, that's what self-love feels like.
Right. Recognizing it.
Yeah. And so, like, hands down, like, sometimes people say, well, I became addicted to drugs or sex or food or money or power. And those are all classic answers. And I can't speak to anyone else's journey. But every one of those types of things that I would at any point in my life dabble in or become very self-destructive in, they were never the most destructive habit. The most destructive habit was the lie I kept feeding myself that allowed me to stay in those behaviors, because a self-loving person would never behave that way.
Yeah.
And boy, did I leave a lot of collateral damage and carnage on the road.
Well, we all are, my
friend. If I've learned anything, and I can clearly say I've learned this. I have clearly learned that I cannot fix what is already done, embrace it for the learning, and move forward, right? Like, yeah, like there's still things I'm fixing. Like they trail me, and they trail me because of all those decisions.
Sure.
And I'm probably not the only one out there like this, but well, I know I'm not.
Of course not. Yeah, we're all paying for the carnage.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm just grateful I have a chance to make restitution. That I have a chance to owe no one anything but to love them. And at the end of the day, what other people think of me is none of my business. I finally love me and still have some work to do so that others can't point the finger at me, but we're getting there. And so no more lying. Like, just say it like it is.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing that, you're doing this, because it's, as we all know, it's hard to be in the public eye in any way, shape, or form because of the assumptions, right? People expect us to change their world for them. We have the answers. We're the panacea. We can make their lives better. But if we explain to our audience that, hey, we've failed these are our current errors. I've lied a million times. I've done this. I've done that. It's like they see both sides. One, they believe that it's nice that somebody's willing to be clear about it, that they're willing to sort of throw themselves under the figurative bus and explain that, hey, we're all clusters, right?
Yeah. Well, you actually started the show by saying, hey, you tend to exaggerate, right? Well,
yeah.
Me too. But what I came to understand is exaggeration is a sophisticated way of saying I tend to lie, not tell the truth, so as to make me look better. Now, I can't speak that for you, but I can speak it for me. That's why I would exaggerate. When I wrote my book, I had 4 people who know me very well go through and fact check everything I wrote. Like I said, listen, sometimes our past lies can become so subconscious we embed them as their truths. I want you to be able to understand. Like, I start the book with a story of 2 little kids who I wouldn't know where to find them today if I tried. However, if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. But like, I was on Sunset Beach on this island, knees locked up, groping. I'll never forget it. Just right? Like, but when I told that story, I thought, did I try to make it better? And the answer was no. I just told it as it was, right? And then as I went through the book and recollected things that happened, is that fair? It's so easy when we're not in a loving state, self-loving state, to want to do things to embellish.
Yes. You know what's interesting though, and I want to end this well, because the thing is Steve, you and I could sit here and talk forever, and eventually people are going to shut this off, right? You guys need to come see us speak live. That's what we'll do. We'll figure that out.
Yeah, we're working on that.
We are working on that, but with the entire life and all of your experiences, and of course you walking through all the tragedies and all the things that you have created about your life, good and bad. You've written this book. You've lit yourself on fire in a beautiful way, because when I'm around you now, I can't wait to be around you, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if there's any one thing you could leave us with, which is, what would you have done to make your life easier?
Well,
is there such a thing?
Again, yesterday is yesterday. I would have done myself a huge favor by understanding what integrity is a lot longer ago, right? I would have done myself a huge favor by understanding the power of play to offset bad decision making. And yet, fundamentally, I have a hard time saying change the past speculatively because I can't.
Sure.
Let's use a magic wand and for a moment say I could have changed the past.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would have found a way as early as possible to find self-love. Because I didn't find it until I was in my 40s.
Yeah.
80% of my life I've lived with destructive behaviors because I bought the lie that I was not enough and I was not lovable.
I think that's the key, Steve. I think that's the answer we're all seeking. The reality is when all of us are seeking, we're listening to the show or we're going to watch a movie, we're going to get something in our life answered for us to take us out of a moment, to put us in a better space physiologically or spiritually, right? We're always looking to have our game upped with as little impact on our current lives as possible. Right. I hope that I can read your book. I'm in the middle of reading your book right now. And I apologize because I have, I know it's an excuse, but I am reading it. I really am.
Well, I'm glad you're reading it because that's taking you out of your normal patterns.
It is.
Right? You said you're not a reader. So even going on that adventure will produce something for you and you get to look and see what it is. Yes. I can't wait to hear what you think.
Yeah. But for me, my issue has always been, even though it's been hard for me to admit that I too don't have any real love for myself. I don't admire who I am, what I've done. I don't, and I don't mean this narcissistically, just I'm not good with me. And the reason I have these conversations over and over again with different musicians and different thought leaders such as yourself is because I'm looking for fixes. I'm looking for Steve to come into my life and tell me where I'm going wrong so I can maybe fix it. Maybe I get the answer finally to love myself.
So right here, live, you don't have to answer, but I'm going to double dog dare you to a challenge.
Oh, well, I'm good with saying anything. So
okay, so here's the challenge. We come back. We do another episode. I'm the guest host of Rockstar Superhero, and I'm asking you the questions.
Tell you what, I accept.
Let me tell you something, brother. You're one of the most lovable people I've met. And like when I hear you say you're still struggling with that.
Yeah.
I'm not a rescuer. I used to be, right? But I've learned that I can only live my life to the fullest and hope that it inspires others to wake up. So all I'm going to say is I just want to nudge myself up close to you in your world, get right over here near the edge of the camera screen and say, let's just switch places and let's have some fun with that. Because you know what's going to happen? I'm sure you've got an amazing listening audience and a bunch of people. Oh, look, he did that. That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, for those who are listening, I moved the faces around on our screen. But
that's funny.
Anyway,
but as we wrap it up, that would just be my invitation to you. And then, of course, please tell all your listeners to go check out playsavestheday.com, playsavestheday.com, and love to see what they think of the book. If they like what they see on the page, they can download it. And a portion of what they take goes to a charity called seizetheawkward.org, which is us having conversations about mental illness challenges. So,
which is of course a whole nother thing that we're talking about doing together as well. And
that's right,
changing the lives one right, all the cheesy things, changing lives one step at a time.
Yep.
But
one sandbox at a time.
One sandbox at a time. I can't wait to jump off like a cliff with you. Right. I really, I've always wanted to try. I apologize because my brain is not fully functioning at the moment. But I've always wanted to try the squirrel suit skydiving things that like they. I've skydived once in my life, and it was a tandem, so I haven't had the real standing alone by yourself.
Well, I haven't done that yet, but we have a great place here on island, so you need to come out. We need to turn it into like a remote podcast.
Maybe we can do a session with some of our favorite listeners. Maybe some people can join us and we can have a play experience over the course of 3 or 4 days.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you talk about that, and I'll just sprinkle the seed of thought in all your listeners. In 2023, we're doing the final dates aren't lined up yet, but the entire program has designed. We're doing what we think is the world's first conference on play to transform the human experience. It's going to be amazing. Literally, it's an adult vacation filled with massive practical application to transform your life. It's going to be fun. So,
okay.
But maybe we do one of these little 3-dayers as a little trial run between now and this time next year. I'd love it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Steve. I think we'd have a blast. Obviously, get to know each other better. If there's any one thing I know I can leave our listeners with is that we are not meant to be alone. We're just not.
Correct.
I mean, yes, there obviously are a few people who have thrived in circumstances less than ideal, right? Painters and whatnot who just need that quiet so they can focus. But as the human species, we're not intended over a course of days, weeks, months, or years to be by ourselves. And that is physically as well as spiritually and mentally, right? The impact of others is supposed to be profound in our life. And the reason successful business people, as an example, are successful is because they've found allies that understand what they are seeking is something that serves other people, and they can provide a solution to help somebody else, which in turn provides an income for that person that they're serving. So if we keep doing that, if we're actually looking out for each other, if we pick a small group, I have this sort of two-fist idea where we bring in 9 other people, including ourselves, and then there's 10 people total. And you just focus on them relentlessly, and they focus on you relentlessly. You elevate the time.
Magic happens.
Magic happens. So that's what I'm seeking for our listeners. That's why I wanted to have Steve here today, because I believe play is a huge component, maybe the most important and understated component of getting us together. And to quote, what was his name? Rodney, the guy who got beat up in Los Angeles.
Rodney King.
Rodney King. He said, why can't we all just get along?
So well stated.